sandwiches, ice cream, coffee and snacks, and many other pleasing treats. Our foods are fresh and tasty, our drinks satisfying and refreshing. They're so good.
Welcome to Average Joe's Drive-In.
And now, on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to Average Joe's Drive-In, episode number 66. I am your host, TJ Washburn. And before we get started, I just wanted to apologize to my guest. We lost, for some weird reason, there were some audio issues, and like the first minute of our conversation just disappeared. I have no idea what happened, but I had to do a little bit of editing to make it flow right, and so I punched in as best I could to make it work. And it's a really great episode, and I hope you enjoy it. And I apologize to Rona, and I hope you guys enjoy it. With that being said, on with the show.
So why don't you give everybody a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do?
I've read romance since I was 14. It was always the genre I knew I wanted to write in, along with women's fiction. And so that's what I do. And then some of it is in fantasy, sort of a subgenre of romance. My last series of books featured mermaids and various other aquatic living creatures. So it's fun, within the bigger genre, I can play in whatever subgenre I want, which is a lot of fun to be able to have that kind of freedom.
Right. Yeah, I totally get that. Having that freedom to branch out from just the main genre you're writing as a horror author. I like to not just write, straight up horror. I like to add, some like fantasy elements or sci-fi elements, or there's so many different things you can add on to some genres, where some genres you're kind of pigeonholed into that like specific genre, and you can't really do a whole lot with it outside of that.
Yeah, there are times when you need to stay very specific and make sure you're not veering too far from reader expectations. Otherwise you lose the reader, which is, really not the goal.
Right. No, you're trying to retain your readers, attention as much as possible. Yeah. So having that sort of,
we'd like to at least meet and preferably exceed your expectations.
Right. I'm just happy if they read it, period, with me. But, that's neither here nor there. But, yeah. So how many books have you written total?
The Melusine's Daughter series, I think, was 7, 8, and 9 of my novels. 2 of my 3 publishers have since folded, so although I've had them published, The Wonderful World of Indies, they come and go so quickly, sort of like People in Oz. So only one is currently still available. So only one publisher, I should say, is still working, and there are 4 novels with them. And then there's numerous short stories in anthologies and things like that. Some I edited, some I participated in.
And so now, is that a case where eventually you're with a lot of the writing deals and stuff, I know eventually, your rights revert back to you and then you're going to re-put them out, or?
Yeah, well, actually, Melusine's Daughter, the first book, had been put out by a publisher, and their readership just wasn't pulling fantasy romance readers, and so they chose not to do the rest of the series. And then when the publisher closed, and as you said, I got my rights back, well, then now I got to play, and found a new publisher who was very excited about having the whole series, and I finally got to complete that. And I'm actually doing that right now. I'm working on a series that the first book came out, about 8 years ago, and the second book never came out. So the first book's been completely rewritten, and I'm working on the second book, which is kind of fun after all this time to be able to go back
and revisit. I actually, one thing that I personally have enjoyed from being self-published is the ability to go back if, maybe not, you don't have that freedom so much, I think, maybe with a publisher, a traditional publisher, where my first book, when I put it out, I had no clue what I was doing. And I'll be honest, it was a mess when I first put it out because I had no editor. I had no, and it just, so a couple years after I released it, I decided that I needed to go back and because I, in my case, I had stopped writing for years. I was in bands and a musician and kind of did that for a good 15, 16 years and just kind of, that was my muse at that point of time for writing because being a singer, I wrote most of the lyrics in the bands I was in and, so it gave me that output. So when I started writing again, it was like, it took me a little bit to kind of really get the wheels greased and going and really getting back on track. And the main story itself, I thought was really good and it had a lot of potential. And I, at the time, when I first put it out, you get that I'm so excited. I finished a book and that was like I wrote it basically as a challenge to myself just to finish writing a book. I wasn't even sure I was ever even going to try to publish it. And that's when I kind of discovered the whole Amazon Kindle publishing deal. And I ended up going that route with basically no knowledge of what I was doing. And so I ended up going back about 2 or 3 years later and rewriting the book, not so much changing anything, but just making things flow better and fixing little mistakes and adding a few little things here and there and just making a much more polished product, which, if you had a publisher, maybe that wouldn't really be a feasible thing to go do because they're not going to want to go through that hassle of. No,
not until you get your rights back. Can you actually and find yourself doing that? Probably. I mean, the first time I did it, which was for the Glass Stiletto. There was definitely a part of me that was reading through it, going, "Oh my God, who wrote this crap?" And then, oh wait, that would be me.
Yeah, I did the same thing. So I
we do feel that way. We do get that way for it's sort of occupational hazard, I guess. But it was also really wonderful because it's not often that as writers we kind of get a chance to stop and really notice where we've grown and changed and improved and things like that. So the Glass Stiletto got longer and better. Ways of Pleasure also got longer, and I knew where the whole series was going to go, so there were some things that got threaded into the first book. And then this time, the publisher who'd originally published the first book in this series, sort of like the shorter novels, around 50,000 words, sort of the NaNoWriMo length.
Yeah.
So it was about 49,000 words. Now it's 92,000.
Oh wow! So you almost doubled the output.
Yeah, and it still needs its final. I feel it still needs its final edit. So it'll probably end closer to 95,000, and that's a massive difference, not just in word count, but in how you tell a story, in the details you go into, in the character development, the backstory. For me, the goal and the motivation and conflict for the characters are always there. That's there if I write 5,000 words, hopefully.
Oh, right.
But to be able to get into much more of where this character came from and let their journey be a little slower, a little longer, a little more intense. On every level has been a really fun experience.
Well, I think it's a bit, and that will, truthfully, that will benefit the reader, I think, because it gives them more time to get entrenched with those characters. And
absolutely.
Which is what you ultimately want out of your readers, is to, either despise or you want them to feel some sort of emotion towards your characters.
Absolutely. You want connection. It's funny, we talk about selling books and talking to publishers and stuff like that. And yes, because let's face it, it's called best-selling novel, not best writing novel.
Right.
If you want that title, you are more than welcome to apply for a Pulitzer or hope that you get nominated for a Pulitzer. But the business is about selling books. However, we didn't write the books necessarily to sell them. We wrote the book to connect. That's the basis that's the motivation. That's why you went back. That's why you made changes. That's why I've made updates. And for me, I know when I've worked on the business side of being a writer that I always have to remember that aspect, that I'm not trying to sell you a book. I'm trying to connect with you and connect you to these characters I've created who've gone through a journey and a learning experience and a growth and all that stuff that I hope you as the reader will understand or maybe have been through or something to that effect. I mean, that's what I've always loved about and the reason why I write romance, because I think relationships are where we learn so much about ourselves, good, bad, ugly, and all of those pieces. And I love exploring, when I write, I love exploring what relationships can and cannot do for us, or what they do and do not do for us, or where they've injured us, and where there needs to be healing, which is always great when a character needs that. Because let's face it, we torture our characters.
Well, of course, you gotta put them through. You gotta put them through something to make the reader connect with them.
It's just no fun,
It's no fun if everything's all happy and cheery. So there's
exactly.
But then this is something I ran into with my first book, The Returners. And I'm curious if it's something you've ever run into. Have you ever had a moment where you have had a reader get mad at you for something that happened to a character in the story, whether it's a animal or a human or whatever?
Not yet, but it may be coming, because I have to injure a dog in the book I'm currently working on.
Oh, you will get hate.
It gets worse. I have to injure the dog. I originally was going to make it easy on myself and just have him hit by a car, and I literally couldn't bring myself to do that. Okay, this is not a real dog, people, and I still couldn't do it. So my hero is forced to adopt this dog, which of course is going to bring up lots of things over the course of the book for him, and then worse, he's going to have to give the dog up in the end because the original owner reappears, and so here he has finally opened up his heart and all of this stuff, and it comes crashing down around him. And see, he knew he shouldn't do that stupid thing, like caring.
Stupid emotions.
I don't know if my readers will be upset, but I certainly hope they will be, moved and affected by that decision. But yeah, I actually had a friend who knew in advance she had a character she had to kill, and it was very difficult for her. It's not in horror. I've had friends who write dark fiction who say, no, all my characters know when they show up that there is a distinct possibility they won't make it through the book.
I think Stephen King was one that said, kill your darlings.
Kill your darlings is also about getting rid of your favorite scenes sometimes.
Yeah, well, that too, but I always associate it more with the no character is safe.
And in your genre, his genre, absolutely. As I said, I had a friend who says, pretty much all my characters know if they walk on, they can be killed off. But she knew in advance, and it was important because it really was, in many ways, the inciting incident for her hero to lose his friend. And so she had to make the character likable enough so that when he, when he died, it would have an impact, but she also needed to make it realistic because it was his own choices that caused the incident that killed him. But she was miserable for weeks knowing she had to do this.
Yeah.
And you can't explain. It's hard to explain that to people. Why are you so upset? I have to kill a character.
Well, especially if it's a character you've kind of been involved with over multiple books, or really, I can see where that would be worse. I am not one for writing sequels. It's not the way my brain processes stuff. I tend to get everything I want to say out in one story with that particular story, and it's just never been a thing, because I've actually had people ask me about writing a sequel to The Returners, which my first book, and it's like, and I've thought about going back, and I've tried to get some ideas, and it's like, but the way that it ended, I don't know if I could, move that story forward.
Go back there, yes.
I could write a prequel a lot easier than a sequel.
That's interesting.
Because of the way I end the story, and it's a downer ending, but also kind of uplifting at the same time. And
Then it's the right ending.
And
that's a challenge, to get the right ending, not necessarily the easy one or the pretty one. I mean, obviously in romance we have a rule. I mean, if you write in genre romance as opposed to something with romantic elements, because those are completely different, you must give your main characters either happily ever now, known as HEA, or HFN. HEA, happily ever after, or HFN, happily for now.
So that leaves it open for a sequel.
Ending. Yeah, you can, although we don't do a lot, there are not a lot of sequels, they're series, and so you'll see characters again and how they're doing, or it ends happily and then in a later book in the series, there's the wedding. There are some books that will go back and show the struggles and stuff, but you must end with the main characters happily. And I have to say, what's another thing that's been such a huge change, when I first started, I would have told you, and the hero and the heroine have to live happily ever after. Now, it can be the hero and the hero, the heroine, the heroine, the hero, the heroine, the hero, you name it, it's a combination. It's just whoever the focus characters are.
Oh, exactly. And
however many there are of those six characters,
now,
they need to be happy at the end.
Now that's something different. That too, like, I've never written. I'm not one, and I get yelled about this from a lot of other writers, but I'm not one to meticulously outline my stories. I'm very much a stream of conscious writer, and I've always been, I try to put the right character, whatever that may be, in the spots, in regards to the sexuality of the character, anything like that. I don't plan that out ahead of time. It's just what feels right for the story.
Well, in romance, you definitely have to plan that out at least a little bit in advance.
I hear you're having a thunderstorm in the background.
Yes, I have a thunderstorm coming here through New England.
Yeah, I'm in Maine, so it's pouring rain up here right now, but no thunder.
It just started. We had sun this morning, and then we had a few minutes. We had like one of those 20-minute rain showers where I suddenly realized I left my windows open.
Yeah.
And then I could see sort of at my office window or at my office door to my back, that it was getting darker and darker, and sure enough, now, for all of you who are listening who are not from New England, this is very common for us in the spring. In fact, all you need to be for a weather person in the spring and summer in New England is you need to say partially sunny, hazy, hot, and humid,
with a chance
of showers in the afternoon, thunderstorms in the afternoon.
The comedian Louis Black has a beautiful bit on New England. If you can find it on YouTube or wherever, check it out. It's called, just type in weather in New England, because I've never heard anybody just nail our weather so eloquently and funny as he nails it.
Oh my gosh.
I
had somebody recently say, is this spring? I'm like, yes, this is spring in New England. It means it feels like spring for a few hours in the afternoon.
Yeah. I was just in a spot up not far from where I live, and we still had 7 inches of snow. So
I believe it. I was just visiting a friend in the White Mountains. There's still snow on Loon.
Yeah. I was up in the mountains around Mount Katahdin, and there's still snow on the ground in spots. So it's New England though, but that's how it works.
It lasts a while, and as somebody who was a transplant here when I came up to go to college, that took me some getting used to. I grew up in Jersey where the seasons kind of change where the calendars say they're going to.
Oh, no, not here. It does it when it feels like it.
No. Winter is much longer, and spring is a theory.
Yeah. And you might have 4 months of summer. You might have 6 weeks. You might have 3. So you never know. My favorite seasons are fall and spring anyway, but that's just me. But getting back to what you're talking about, like you were saying, you kind of have to plan that out. Now
I have to know a little bit, especially since the whole book turns on the relationship. The relationship is the focus. That's what romance is. It's the genre of a relationship.
Right.
Where science fiction is the genre of an idea or a concept, usually a science fiction concept, and fantasy is the genre of a world, where that's at its center. I have to know what relationships I'm going to have. And I need to sort of know in advance who they are individually and how this relationship is going to change them and affect them. For me, the best romance novels, and I usually do this in mine because I agree with it, is one where the last thing the hero and heroine want at this point and need at this point is a relationship. This is not what they want. This is not what they're looking for.
It's the story of my life.
This is not a good time for this, people. But they're going to get it anyway. Wow, are we getting a thunderstorm, people?
Yeah, I can hear it in the background.
Wow, this is our first one of the season.
Yeah, we had a few boomers here like a week ago, but it wasn't like a long drawn out thing. It was like 15, 20 minutes, and then it was kind of done.
This one it sounds a little like it's fading fast, but it's one of those ones where it got dark, it got really dark.
Yeah.
And it's fading.
It changed from light gray to sort of dark, medium gray to dark gray to black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, one of those fast moving.
Now, if only I could plot that well, move from light gray to dark gray to, massive boom and then move back off. I know my characters going in. And who and why they are, how they got there. I know a bit of my backstory. I've never really been a plotter or an outliner until my most recent book. All the books in this series are retold fairy tales, and the first three are retold Hans Christian Andersen tales. And
cool. I
needed to kind of work in where the fairy tale was going to be, sort of what each character's arc was going to be, then the romantic arc, and then the external thing that's going on, which sort of makes it, as I said, like the Snow Queen. So that actually required an outline for the first time. I sort of wrote down what scenes I knew everybody needed on index cards. I'm a huge index card fan, must be from being raised by a librarian. And then I sort of not shuffled them, obviously, because God knows what order I'd get then. But I sat there and put them in an order after that. Going, okay, this one's going to go here, then this happens, and then this happens. Okay, no, this has to happen earlier, so move that card up there. And it's been a different process. I've actually kind of liked it. I don't, some authors feel that outlining takes the creativity away. And then it's less fun to write. But I found that sort of knowing what scenes there were almost was like it was a skeletal first draft.
Yeah.
With the outline.
I know I'm one of those authors that feels very... doing the meticulous outlining makes me feel boxed in. Like, if I do it, I have to... It's more of a mental overcoming thing than really anything else, because then I feel like I've got this outline down of what's going to happen. If I stray from that, it's going to screw the rest of my outline up, and I don't want to do that. So
yeah, it's definitely not a meticulous outline. It's more of a guideline.
Yeah, I like to. I mean, for just about every story that I have, I write out basically like a blurb or a synopsis about what I want the overall story to kind of be, and it's. It just gives me a little bit of an idea of, okay, these are some characters and this and this and this. But I find that gives me, it gives me the jumping off point to start the story. But I like the stream of conscious writing because I know for me, it just gives me a chance to go in directions that I never intended. And 90% of what out of the 5 fiction, the 3 novels I've written, has very much taken on their own lives, and I've written 2 or 3 novellas that did the same thing. And, the one thing I will say, I usually have a really good idea about my beginning, middle, and end is my short stories, because I find short stories so difficult to write compared to a novel, which I know most people probably think just the opposite, but you have such a short amount of space to get that done. And
it's a very different skill. It's a very different process. A novel takes a character from, it's the hero's journey. It takes a character from darkness into light, into higher light, into hopefully a completely different life than they would have lived at the beginning of the book if this inciting incident didn't happen. In a short story, you don't quite have that level of self-discovery. I mean, it's usually more like a bone breaking than, it's very sudden and it's a very different form of writing. You get rid of all your extraneous adjectives and adverbs, which Stephen King would be happy about because...
Oh, yes, he hates those.
That's another one of his favorite,
Get rid of them all.
The road to hell is paved with adverbs, according to Mr. King.
Oh, yes, you don't need them. Take them out. If you have to describe it that way, you're not doing your job.
Yes. The time when I find that I need my notes or my background information is after the first draft is written. I'm really going through the second draft or second or third. It depends on, this one may be different, as I said, because I outlined. But I know that when I'm in the editing mode, and I'm always very aware of what my character. For me, it's two characters, and I need to know their internal and external goal, motivation, and conflict. And if there are writers listening, I highly recommend Deborah Dixon's book by that title, Goal, Motivation, and Conflict. And I go through, and when I'm editing, if that scene does not move the hero or the heroine's internal or external goal, motivation, and conflict, and preferably more than one of those things,
right,
the scene disappears.
See, now that's that right there is probably, I think, not just me, but almost every writer I know, that's one of the most difficult things to do for me is to start trimming stuff because it's like, oh, but I might need that there. Or
no, if it doesn't move, see, that's why I need to know. If it doesn't move the goal, motivation, or conflict, I don't need it there. And if I feel like I need it there, then I need to edit it and add to it so that it does move one or more of those things for one or more of those characters. And I do know it from my villain usually. I don't always know my villain's internal, goal, motivation, conflict, but I do know his or her external. So I will definitely get rid of it in that case. But yeah, because otherwise it is a scene. Elmore Leonard, one of my favorite piece of information he gave. Advice he gave was delete all the parts of the book that the readers tend to skip.
I don't usually skip anything in a book because I like to just soak it all in because to me, I'm always thinking there's something relevant there if the writer put it in, whether it might just be a little minute detail, but yeah, there's a reason they're describing that rock over there. And it may come into play later on, or maybe not. Maybe they just wanted to describe a nice rock. But
at the end, too many times with some of those books, I find out no, that was just a rock, and I don't know if it was NaNoWriMo and they needed word count, but really don't need this information. Thank you very much.
I've also been told I write. Personally, I am not the greatest descriptive writer. I write more like a screenplay because it's how my mind, I'm as a visual thing more than...
You're also a lyricist.
Yeah. So my brain tends to roll that way a lot of times, and I've found that for me, it seems like the people that like my writing really like my writing, and the people that don't really don't like it. There's not really a happy medium.
And, that's okay. I mean, the great thing about, readers is that they're always looking for something new to read, and they're always looking for a new book, and nobody has to be like anybody else. When I was writing shorter, I definitely didn't have as much description. When I've now moved to this over 90,000 word level, I'm finding myself needing and using more description, and when I reread it the first time, I'm like, this is dragging or this is too much. And I need my beta readers and my writers group to be able to say to me, no, this is okay.
Beta readers are such an awesome thing if you have good beta readers because especially the ones that aren't afraid to point out things that they didn't like or why was this in here? I was kind of confused me or I read the whole thing and that part right there, I don't know why. It had nothing to do with anything else in the story.
Right, or I still don't understand, or that's what you need from a good beta reader. And then I have a writers group that's actually we do support rather than critique, and so those become my alpha readers. That's when I hear it out loud a lot of times for the first time and go, whoopsie, I've used that word 6 times. That's got to get edited.
That's usually when I notice when I start doing like my final draft and I'm my final edit when I'm going through and reading out loud is when I notice I was like, wow, I have used that phrase like 8 times in this. There's no need for that. I need to change a few words here or take it out completely or...
Yeah.
Or,
do you keep a list of I have a list of the words I know that I overuse.
Oh, I already know what the words are I overuse, so those are the first ones I look for.
Yep, they're the first ones I look for. I keep a check. I go through as a checklist. I will go and do a universal search and see how many times these wretched things have showed up in my poor manuscript and weakened it.
Yeah, I put it right into the search on Word and be like, all right, I'm going to find all of these and figure out which ones really need to be there and which ones don't.
And which ones get to go. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of the ones that I overuse are ones almost every writer tends to overuse anyway. I am finding myself being more mindful of that when I'm writing now, though. Like, I'm just, subconsciously... No, I can use something else there. No, I'm not. I have already used.
You get used to it. You start noticing it in advance.
Yeah, which that was funny going back. Like I said on my first book, and going back and rereading it because I hadn't even looked at it in like 2 years, and going back and going over it, I was like, wow, why I just. Not even just those words, which there was a lot of those, and I fixed them. But there was things where I described something twice within like 3 paragraphs. It both meant the same thing. I just described them differently twice. It's like I don't need to have both of those in there. I'm going to take those out.
Yeah, I've had some things that editors have pointed out, logistical things. He's sitting on the couch and all of a sudden he's across the room. Or he takes off his tie twice. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'll get the comments. How many ties is he wearing?
He's got layers of ties. It's a new fashion trend.
And,
you have your morning tie, your afternoon tie, and your evening, supper tie. So, yeah,
those are the moments where I'm eternally grateful to my editors who have been wonderful.
And that's one thing. Like I have never really gotten to the point. I've only just recently actually had a outside editor really do anything with my work that was on the professional level. And it was definitely an experience because I'm not used to that. I have been releasing books for 4 or 5 years now, and that was the first time I'd ever really had a professional critiquing my work. And, you tend to, I think anybody tends to take that initial criticism or critique, you're like, well, this is what I meant, and but then you got to think of it from their standpoint. They're trying to get the best story out of you. So they're not doing it to be a jerk. They're doing it because it doesn't either need to be there or something needs to be added or, it's a very, I'm trying to think of the right thing here. It's a very, It's a situation of trust, I guess. You have to trust your editors, I guess, would be the way that I felt about it. Having a professional, I got to trust his opinion on this because this is kind of what he does, and he knows what he's talking about. So
I've been working with the same editor and the same publisher for a while, and the first time I sent her a book that I was happy with it, I loved it, and she said, no, that was a little devastating. That was very hard.
Especially if it's somebody you've had kind of a long-term relationship with and you're kind of comfortable and used to them doing your work.
It was tough. And she was right. I mean, one of the several things she said about the book that it was missing or that it needed, she was absolutely right. Eventually I fixed it. Eventually it actually was picked up. But I've always felt that, just just like, my hairdresser I can do my hair, but my hairdresser makes it look better. My nails look better if I have a professional do it. Trust me, my books are better for my editor when my editors are done with them.
Oh, absolutely. That story it was in, an anthology, and I think it was 20 other writers in it. And when it was all said and done, and the edits were made, and the changes and the suggestions and everything went through, I was like, wow. I was like, those few little things made that story so much better. And it's just like, I'm so glad that I took his advice and wasn't pig-headed about it, and just, because I'm not used to that as far as my own going. So it was a good lesson for me personally as a writer to be like, sometimes you just got to shut up and listen to what the other person's saying, because they are doing it for the right reasons, not because of X, Y, or Z.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm always, especially the publisher I work with now knows my work, and the editor I'm working with and stuff. And I actually look forward to getting her edits back, because I know she's going to catch things I missed. She's going to tighten things up that I, glanced over. And it will still be my book, but it will be a much better book for it. And I actually, I guess I'm fortunate, but I look forward to the work that they will do. And I've learned from the different editors, especially you mentioned doing anthologies. It's one of the interesting opportunities is to work with different editors and the voices. And because when you create an anthology, because I've edited several, you needed to have a cohesiveness. And I'm always impressed by the people who can edit those well and who have a real knack for it, because it's a gift.
Well, I think there's a lot, not just with the stories. First of all, you've got to pick stories that are going to work well together. Whether, it depends, I guess, on the theme of the anthology, whether it's kind of a loose type deal, or if it's one of those where there's a real specific theme in mind. But then you've got to look at your stories, and you're looking at like, okay, well, this story and this story maybe are a little too close together, so we don't want to put them back to back. And then there's figuring out which story should go where. All these stories are good, obviously, because they got picked, but which ones are the best? Because to me, you would want those at the beginning, because you want to really, grab the reader and want them to go through all of them, or, and you want to end strong. So you want to have, I think you want your best to be the first and last story.
Yeah, I kind of did a bit of both. I did a series of 2 anthologies, Once and Twice Upon an Apocalypse, with Scott Goudsward, which had very, very specific guidelines. The first frustrating part was how often at least half the stories we got didn't fit the guidelines. Which is crazy. So if you have newbie writers listening, if you listen to the guidelines, read the guidelines, and do everything the guidelines say you should do, you will be ahead of most of the other submissions.
What's really funny about this is Jeremy Flagg and I had this very discussion just a couple episodes ago as well. So, it's
amazing. You asked for zombie, we asked for zombie retold fairy tales, and in the other book, Lovecraft retold fairy tales. And the number of times we didn't get either a fairy tale or a zombie was quite startling. Then
I think
we had the challenge, as you had mentioned, you don't want things that are too similar. We had the challenge then of having to make some decisions early if we could, because you couldn't put in 4 Beauty and the Beast stories and 3 Peter Pan stories and 6 Pied Piper stories. Boy, did we get Pied Piper for Lovecraft. So we did our best to, when we made a decision, to post it, to let people know, so that we weren't getting more submissions and people weren't spending all this time writing stories that we couldn't accept because we already had our Cinderella story and things like that. That was definitely a challenge.
And it's one thing too. I guess from a personal standpoint, I never had the confidence to send stuff out to anthologies until just the last year or two, is when I really first started being like, all right, I'm going to actually try to send some stuff out. And, I'll admit it, I'm like 0 for 4 or 0 for 5 on submissions this year. It's just not happening. And part of it makes me like, man, do I suck that bad? And then the other thing is, it kind of motivates me to figure out, well, why aren't these getting accepted? And some of them actually I got really good feedback on, and it was positive feedback. You know, they really liked the story, but a couple of them was the case of, we have a couple stories that are kind of similar to this, and you know, that are about the same word count and everything. So we've decided to pass on yours.
And some of it is that, you know, and that's the challenge. The fun part with anthologies for me has always been when it's an unusual call, and it becomes a writing prompt. In other words, you know, zombies and fairy tales isn't something I would normally write. Or even romantic zombie stories. I have one that hasn't found a home yet, called Romero and Juliet.
Oh, nice. One of my favorite directors, by the way.
And, you know, and it's not something I normally would have done, but I saw a call, and when I read the request for submission, a story popped into my head that would have never entered without that. So I think that's one of the fun things sometimes if as a writer, you know, you're like, oh, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to work on next, or you're in the middle of a novel and you're stuck and you just need something kind of new to try. Looking for anthology calls and looking through, I should say, anthology calls can be a real blast and a real inspiration for coming up. And I actually had somebody who had promised me a story for an anthology, and she's like, I'm so sorry, but it turned into a novel. Like,
which is funny. Which was,
and, you know, I'm bummed, but I'm thrilled for you.
Which is kind of funny because that's one of the things I got back on my submission for the New England Speculative Writers Anthology was that they were like, this story isn't meant to be a short story. This needs to either be a novella or a novel. It's just, there's too much there to just have it be a short story. So
that is that you had said earlier that, you know, that's one of the challenges. Writing a short story is a very different process, and you know, it's not a short novel. That is not the definition of a short story. No, and it can
it can very easily turn into that. I try to follow like my own mental set of guidelines when I'm writing a short story. It's like, okay, we don't need to know this. We don't need to know this, this, and this. I need to write basically however many words, whether it's 2,000 or 8,000. I need to get, you know, I almost think of it as like an extended scene that I'm trying to make happen with maybe, you know, a couple little nuances and things added in, but I don't need the backstory. I don't need a long backstory. I don't need this. I don't need that. And I try to kind of weave it so it's more of a, you know, it's either a series of moments or one specific moment depending on the story that you're focusing on. And
I agree. I find that when I write short stories, I have to be very finale driven.
Right, you need to know you really need to know what your ending's going to be.
And then everything else is kind of how I get there. And I've edited short stories for people, it's always interesting. Editing your own work is hard because, as you mentioned earlier, you have to kill your darlings. You frequently have to get rid of scenes and moments that were just so beautiful and they read so well and they do nothing for the story and they have to go. Which is, if you ask me, what, you know, blog posts and newsletters can be for. Because it's always fun to send those out and give them sort of a second life. But I've been given short stories by friends, you know, that were 6,000 or 7,000 words long and told to bring them to 5,000. Now, percentage-wise, that is a huge part of the story to take 2,000 words out of a 7,000 word story. And what I tend to do is I read it to the end, and then I go back and everything somebody just posted today, it was Remy who's posted today about the, you know, how do you cut? And I'm like, ruthlessly. You can't be emotional in those moments. It's not about that. It is about what the story needs or doesn't need. And you have to get rid. It's hard, but occasionally you're right. You know, as the editors have said to you, you've got a story. It's not even that, you know, that it had too much description, but who the characters were, their journey, what they needed to have happen was, as they said, it's longer than
Oh yeah, and they had a list of specific things that they were like, we really would like to know more about this, because it's fascinating. We want to know more about that stuff. We think you've got some good description of certain things, and because my story was a cross between kind of a sci-fi fantasy western. It was different. It was a little different. And the thing is, for me, I am a huge fantasy fan and sci-fi fan, and that's what horror was like the precipice for me loving reading, but fantasy and sci-fi were what really made me a reader. I devoured everything I could get for R.A. Salvatore and Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I'm trying to remember the other guy's name. JB Nix. There was a lot of stuff, and a lot of just Dean Koontz. Even though his books are more horror orientated, there's a lot that aren't. But there was just a lot of that stuff that really made me. So I wanted to get back into kind of writing some of that stuff, but it was like, I don't want to write an epic fantasy. I just, the time investment, my brain just will not hold on.
Yeah,
for that long.
My brain doesn't develop stories in the epic fantasy size and realm.
Most of mine are barely novels. They just are kind of creeping on that edge of being a really long novella most of the time, because the way I write and the way my brain processes, I have a hard time writing anything that's like, I think my longest of my books was about 80,000 words. So that was about the longest, my longest, of my works.
One of the interesting results of independent and self-publishing is that length has now gone out the window.
I try to write for the story, not the length anyway. So if the story can be told in 100 words and it's great, then awesome. If the story needs to be told in 700 pages, awesome. If it can be told in 10, great. If that's what the story calls for.
Right, but there was a time when then that's wonderful that that's what the story called for, but it was never seeing a reader. Right. It was never seeing the light of day. It was never getting published. And that was true for the things that were ridiculously long, too. I mean, yes, there have been exceptions in most of the genres, but, that's been a huge change in the last several years, that you can find one short story for sale or for free. You can find novellas in a way. Novellas had no life.
I love novellas because my reading time is so limited.
People are really loving it. You can binge novellas in a way you can't with other things.
Oh, exactly. And that's the other reason I think maybe they've never gone away, but I think that's a big reason anthologies are kind of making a comeback. You're starting to see more of them again, because I think not just, from a personal standpoint, but everybody is so busy and has so much going on. The anthologies are perfect because you can I'm going to read one story a night, and then I'm not going to be confused and forget where I left off, because that's the problem with me with novels. Sometimes I'll get, a ways into it, and then I can't read it for a week and a half. And then I'm like,
what the heck happened?
Well, now I got to go back and reread some of this, and then I don't have time to read anymore tonight.
And the other thing that's happened is, for example, there are some series that are done that are sort of connected novellas that have a theme that connects them, and then you sell the novellas singly, and then eventually you put them together in groupings. There's one in the romance industry called 1001 Nights. And then after they sell singly at $1.99 or $2.99 because they're short, they put them together in groups of 4 or 5, and then they sell the print versions. And sometimes you've read one, and sometimes you haven't read any of them, and it does very well for everybody. It keeps everybody. It allows you to write short. It allows you to get more exposure, and then it allows you to overlap readerships. So if you have a related readership with an author, now you're in an anthology with them. Now your readers find them and their readers find you. And it's a win-win, which is really wonderful.
Oh, absolutely. Especially these days where in the self-published world, especially, it's so hard to market your own books. And unless you have some financial ability to put behind it, outside of some basic marketing strategies, I think it's kind of hard to get the word out there, which is why I think anthologies are such a wonderful thing. Because, everybody's readers are checking out this and discovering some new writers, and, and like you said, it just kind of builds everybody's readership up at the same time.
It's definitely a win-win, which is wonderful. I mean, yes, readers want to find new authors, and I know, I've always thrilled when I find one that I can, can't wait to find their whole backlist and read everything they've written, and catch up or whatever it is. But discoverability is the key, and that's a challenge. Because the
self-publishing thing, and I think I've talked about this with a few other authors, is both a blessing and a curse. I think it's a blessing because it allows everybody a chance to get their stuff out there. But it's also a curse because it allows everybody to get their stuff out there.
Well, there's certainly stuff out there that's not ready to be out there and shouldn't be out there and things like that. And
I'll be honest, I made that mistake with my first book. I never should have put it out when I did, but being excited that I had finished something and honestly, probably the first two things I put out were like that, although I think the second was definitely much more polished. But it's just, I think sometimes that hurts you more than it helps you because somebody reads that all excited for a new author and then it's not a polished product and then they're like, oh, well, geez, if that's going to be the quality of this, I like the story, but, I don't want to deal with the quality level, that sort of quality level.
Absolutely. And that, it certainly hurt the people, it's, eventually it will fall out a bit and there won't be quite as many people racing to publish and things like that. I think independent publishing, to me, it's like independent film. It's some of it's dreck and some of it's amazing, and hopefully you get to find a few new amazing because of it. And I think people are.
Now, this is a great segue because I always, Average Joe's Drive-In is all about, guests from different backgrounds and stuff, but I always like to talk movies with my guests. So because that is one of the big focuses of my show. So you're the first romance author I've had on the show. So this is I think maybe an interesting segue into this. With modern romance movies, what drives you nuts about them and what do you like about them?
Modern romance movies, what do I like about them? What drives me nuts? I think when it feels formula, and the hero or heroine's main goal is, with a few exceptions, if the heroine's goal is to fall in love, then I'm going to be frustrated with it. The truth is most romance novels do not translate to the screen, and most romance readers do not want them translated to the screen. Romance comedy is basically written for the screen. There's, which is great, but very few of those rom-coms come from books, which I find interesting. And it's mostly because, as romance readers, we don't want to see anybody else's interpretation of the book. What we see in our heads is great, and we don't want to see it any other version of it.
And honestly, I think. Which is kind of a weird parallel, but I think horror and romance have a lot of similarities in the fact that most horror novels don't translate well to the screen because horror novels to me usually are so much more vivid and descriptive than what you can show on the screen, so you lose some of that in translation between the two mediums.
Probably. You also, need to, you also have to wonder if, what the reader brings to it, what scares them, obviously, is also going to affect how they receive the book.
Oh, absolutely. Because which is interesting because I'm having one of my first, a story I wrote called Chum is being adapted into a film, and it's getting shot in a few weeks. They're going to start filming. And so I had a chance because the director wrote the screenplay adaptation of it, but he sent it to me because he wanted some input and made sure that I was happy with it. But it's so different in the way that it's being told because it's two vastly different mediums.
Well, picture 1,000 words. I mean, that's a very different. And pacing needs to be different because once somebody's in a movie theater, they're not going to leave and come back and watch the rest of it later.
Oh, exactly. And the thing is, the story that they chose is a very narrative story. There's not a lot of dialogue in it. Obviously, you can't have it's a short film, but you can't have a 20-minute film with no dialogue, with people interacting, and there has to be something there. I mean, you can do it, whether it's going to work or not.
I mean, I've been surprised by some things. The fact, for example, that they managed 8 different points of view when they translated the Joy Luck Club from the book to the screen.
That's insane, because that really getting 8 different points of view into a feature-length movie and not have it be 8 hours long.
Each of the daughters and each of the mothers has a story, and they are all told separately, as if it were 8 stories. It's told as 8 different stories connected by our heroines, who is going to be going to China rather, for the first time in her life. So, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. On occasion, they do create these scenarios where I'm like, you read the book and you think, how on earth are they going to translate this? Actually, Ready Player One is a very narrative book.
Yeah, and I haven't read that, nor have I seen the movie yet, so I'm kind of
read the book last year. It immediately became one of my favorite books, and then my son and I were listening to it in the audio form as well, and we knew we could feel what some of the changes were going to have to be, and one of them had to be how much narration there is and how much backstory and explanation he gives, which is fine in a book, but is not going to work.
It doesn't. Screen. It's not very. Yeah, exactly. It's not interesting on the screen. So.
And we're pleased. I mean, Olivia Goldsmith, who wrote the First Wives Club, wrote this article after about having her book made into a movie, and actually it was optioned as a movie before the book, before it was supposed to be released as a book. It ended up not having it. Wow. It actually was released as a book first, but the movie option came first. And she had written this article after Anne Rice was going off about how horrified she was and how terrible and horrible she thought it was what they did to Interview with the Vampire. And Goldsmith said, people are constantly asking her, did they change your book? And she says, yes, they made it a movie. And they changed the book dramatically from one to the other. The whole focus is different between the First Wives Club, the book, and the movie. But, as the author, she had to just say, yep, it's going to be a movie. It's going to be different.
And I think in a lot of cases, if you option something to be made into a film, you almost have to go in. You have to go in with the mindset that they're going to have to change some things.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you could, in good conscience, be like, no, it needs to be exactly like the book, which is one of the things that drives me bonkers. From is when people bitch, well, it's not like the book. Well, no shit, it's not like
never
the book.
Never was intended to be, never will be.
It's an adaptation of the book, is what it's an adaptation. There's going to be parts, yes, they're going to take parts directly from it and dialogue and everything, but there's also stuff they're going to have to change to fit, the narrative of what they're trying to do on the screen.
Especially if the book is long. I mean, any of the Harry Potter books or
Oh, I love the Harry Potter.
Yeah, and I love the
They're so
movies.
good. And I've never read the books though. So.
I enjoyed them both, and they're very different. And there's whole characters missing from the movie that were in the book.
Oh wow.
And scenes that I wish and lines that I wish had been in there that could have been, but for whatever reason, aren't. And and they are different mediums, and I enjoy them differently. It's one of the reasons why, as somebody I'm also a theater person, the books, the movies that are movie musicals are fine, but when you take a Broadway show and try to bring it to a movie, it doesn't work. And when they've tried to take movie musicals and bring them to the stage, it doesn't work.
Right.
Singing in the Rain is awful on the stage. The Wizard of Oz is terrible on the stage. It is nowhere near as good as the originals. I mean, there are some exceptions that get close. West Side Story, even the reason Chicago did a good job, but it's a different medium, and it will be experienced differently, and it needs to be appreciated for what it is, not what it isn't.
Now, okay, so we're getting to that time where we got to kind of start wrapping things up. But before we go, I wanted to ask you this question right now. I guess as an author, what are some books that you would like to see adapted into movies?
Oh my God, what are some books I would like to see adapted into a movie? I honestly can't think of any off the top of my head that I'm like, oh my God, I would love to see this on the screen. The books that are my favorites, the Anne Bishop Black Jewels trilogy, which I read the first 3 books once a year because I think they're so incredible. I'm trying to picture my keeper bookshelf. None of those would I actually want to see changed. I've been impressed by certain ones. I've been impressed by the way they took The Handmaid's Tale and turned it into a miniseries. And I'm glad they did that as opposed to, they did try to make that into a movie once and it was a complete and utter disaster. So,
and that's a cool thing, I think, now, too, with the Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu and all these different online sources. You're getting to see things that maybe wouldn't work so well as a movie translated into a miniseries where it would work better because they're not as restricted as network television, and they can tell it over a longer period like it should be told.
Or for any, they can tell it in any period. They can make it 5 episodes or they can make it 15. They're not even restricted within that. I think one of the ones, now I have not read the book series, but I have many friends who are, and they try to make it into a movie, and I don't understand why. But the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, I think a lot of people would very much like them to try to do that as a series.
It's, from what I understand, it is going to, they did get the go-ahead to make it into an actual series instead of films. They did the film last year, and most of my friends, I'm a huge Stephen King fan, but I'm not a big Dark Tower fan, but I've only read the first book, 2 books. I can't even remember, to be honest, if I've read the second one. I think I have. But I didn't like the writing style in it, if that makes any sense, because it doesn't feel like a traditional King work to me. It feels different.
It's definitely a different, for everything I know about it suggests it's got a very different fandom, but originally Ron Howard was going to work and make it do not simultaneous, but in a process there was going to be it was going to be sort of a mini series and then a movie and then a mini series and a movie, and it was going to be this whole long sort of new way of telling a story, and that never happened. And then this movie came out randomly, and I haven't heard anything about them going back to the miniseries yet, which is too bad because everything I know about that series suggests that would benefit from something told slowly over time.
That kind of a more of a long form format of telling the story, and personally, from my perspective, the one series, well, there's 2 series of books that I would love to see adapted into films, and I seriously doubt they will ever happen, is the Deathgate Cycle by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, which is a fantasy series that's just absolutely one of my favorite all-time series, and the Crystal Shard series by R.A. Salvatore. Are just, I would love to see those series done, both fantasy series, because I don't think we get enough fantasy like straight up real, like what I consider like real straight up fantasy type stuff. So I would love to see some more of that stuff get adapted.
Yeah, as I said, I can't, I don't know if I've ever actually read a book and gone, wow, this would make a great movie, but that's just not how I see things, and it all depends on your view of the world. There are people who see things and imagine a movie. I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda.
That's me. I'm one of those people. I visualize everything in that kind of, a movie format, I guess, when I'm visualizing stuff. So for me, I kind of do see that sometimes when I'm reading something. It's and like, this would make a great movie,
And that makes total sense to me. I mean, I don't think anybody other than Lin-Manuel Miranda could read Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton and go, wow, this would make a great musical.
Right.
I mean, most people
people
weren't reading it, for
something
God's
you
sake.
would
So only he would see that. And thank goodness.
So is there any have you seen anything recently you really liked?
I have survived the most recent Avengers film,
which I still have not seen. Please don't spoil it yet. I have managed to this point to avoid spoilers.
But I've been a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I loved Black Panther. There've been some missteps, but I think what they're attempting, 10 years worth of character arcs and backstories and origin stories to create something cumulative and culminating in something
crazy.
Like this is, unheard of. So
it's crazy what they've done with it, and they've made it work. But the one good thing with that is they have, with most of those characters, they have 40, 50, 60 years worth of stories to draw from.
Yeah, but I think
there's so much history behind the characters.
But they also have a lot of fans like me who aren't drawing from anything.
Oh, exactly. But I mean, I'm talking about from the filmmaker's perspective. They have so much to draw from to make very rich characters.
They've made it work for those of us who were drawing from nothing, which I find really amazing.
Oh, I could definitely see that point. I've always been a casual comic book fan. So I'm familiar with a lot of it, but there's a lot of it I'm just like, I got no clue. And so it's interesting to see the different reactions, like with anything, from the diehard comic fans to the people
absolutely.
Who aren't as familiar. I always find it interesting because I mean, I am a proud nerd, and I will admit that nerds tend to be like some of the worst critics and nitpicky when it comes to stuff. So it's kind of interesting to see the two parallels between the different viewerships, I guess. So, hey, like I said, we gotta start wrapping it up, but I thank you very much for coming on and hanging out and talking. It was very interesting, and it's always fun to talk to somebody that I don't know personally, really well. So it's always an interesting experience to get to know that person and hear their thoughts on stuff. Before we go, is there anything you want to plug or websites you want to let people know where they can find your stuff?
You've been referring to me, and we've met through the New England Speculative Fiction Writers as Rona, but that if any of your readers look for my books, they're not going to find them under that name. I write under Rachel Kenley, which is Kenley. So if you are looking for the Glass Stiletto or the Mermaid books, that's where you should find them. And I am online at rachelkenley.net.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you very much again for coming on. And before we go, I'd like to thank my sponsors, the Maine Cannababes. They're doing some awesome charity work throughout the state of Maine with cannabis-related causes. If you want more information or you want to find out about laws pertaining to different things within medical cannabis or normal cannabis use, go to their website, www.mainecannababes.com. You can also find out where you can check them out online and check them out online. Yes, you can check them out online at mainecannababes.com. But if you want to find out about where they're doing some appearances or where you who their beneficiary is for this year for one of the, the calendar, the money they raise from their calendar, or anything else about them, or follow their social media pages. That's all on maincanababes.com. And before we go, as I've said about 14 times already, I want to leave you with one words of advice. Remember, kids, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, and I will see you sexy animals on the flip side. Thanks for listening to Average Joe's Drive-In. If you'd like to talk movies or contact the show, add our social media pages. You can add us on Facebook at Average Joe's Drive-In Podcast, on Twitter at TWJ Author, on Instagram at Thomas Washburn Jr. You can also hit up www.thomaswashburnjr.com for more information about the show and related links. If you'd like to support the show, you can buy TJ's books on Amazon. Just type in Thomas Washburn Jr. in the search. Books are available in Kindle and paperback formats. If you have Kindle Unlimited or Prime, you can read the books for free and money will be earned by the pages read. It doesn't cost you anything and it supports the show. Until next time, you've been listening to Average Joe's Drive-In.
It's intermission. Rise and stretch time. Time to refresh yourself and visit our snack bar. Got a yen for hot popcorn? Your favorite soft drinks are sparkling cold. The juicy Frank sizzling hot. There's delicious coffee, freshly brewed, and all kinds of ice cream and candy to tempt you. Showtime will be announced loud and clear to get you back to your car in time. So stretch your legs. Come to the snack bar now.